Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Bert Stedman, Senator for District A. And today what we have to bring before the committee is Senate Bill 178. And if I could give you just a little bit of background on the concept of what we're doing, and then I'll talk a little bit about the specifics. But as we have amassed multi-billions in excess liquidity for the state of Alaska outside of the permanent fund, we've got a unique opportunity that the state of Alaska has never faced before, and that opportunity is to create a fund source for future operations of the state. If we back up a decade, even a decade and a half, or quite frankly even 5 years ago, the discussions in the building was, when will the legislature go into the permanent fund, remove revenue to run the state, and or risk the state dividend to the people out of the permanent fund for the operations of the state. Well, as we fast forwarded through that last 5 years, it put us in a position today where we've got excess liquidity that we could set aside to create an endowment for the operations of the state. And this concept then would take roughly $15 billion, and all these numbers again are subject to the committee process and the process within the legislature. But the bill as submitted would roughly target $15 billion to set aside, allow expenditures to come off of that, or a revenue stream of 4.5% a year for the trailing 3 years ending value. Those funds then would just go into the general fund if needed. The legislators at the time in the future would not have to take that 4.5% if they don't want to, or if it's not needed. But if it is needed, they could take up to that, and then they would be blocked from further appropriations into that fund. So what that would do, Mr. Chairman, is give the legislature in the future some flexibility. They would have 4.5% of that 3-year market value coming into the general fund, and it may be school funding, it may be the university, it may be the test budget, it could be capital projects, it could be whatever is needed at the time, and give them full flexibility to meet the needs of the state. But the other avenue that is very appealing to a lot of my constituents, from appropriating billions and billions of our savings and expensing it out in 4 or 5 years, leaving the state in a position where we have virtually no cash reserves other than a permanent fund. And at a time, possibly in the future, when we have our revenue source squeeze. And as we all know, coming off of oil, we're subject to market price fluctuations there of staggering proportions from year to year. And we're struggling with production coming out of our oil fields. Also, it would force the sitting legislature in the future, if revenue got squeezed and they went into the endowment for the 4.5%, after that they would have to sit down and take a look at the operating budget, and it would force the tough decisions to pull back expenditures. The easiest decision to make is not to pull back expenditures and just appropriate the monies that are available on the table, putting off the tough decisions for either a future legislature or putting it off. Well, with these amount of savings we have, we could put it off for several years and put us to a position where we run out of cash. We actually end up what they call cliffing, or we end up with huge reductions that would be needed in the operating budget. I think, Mr. Chairman, this is a unique opportunity for us to permanently protect the dividend stream of the Alaska Permanent Fund, help guide future legislators in protecting the vast quantity of assets that we've set aside and saved, all of us here in this room over the last several years, and then still leave the flexibility on the table for future legislators to appropriate the funds when needed to the areas around the state that are needed at the time. The fiscal note it has some pretty substantial numbers in it, but we are already managing these monies today. So it's really just a way of putting an envelope around, within the Department of Revenue, around these funds. And that, Mr. Chairman, pretty much sums up the bill. It's a point, I think, in time where this discussion needs to take place in the legislature here, and collectively between all of the committees and the members, try to decide how we're going to protect these savings. We don't know who's coming back in front of us, but there's been times in the past when there's substantially larger spending appetite in this building than there is funds available, and clearly this would help neutralize some of that. With that, Mr. Chairman, let's just open it up for questions.
All right, thank you, Senator.